But today we're going to talk about something that might be a little controversial. Hi, I'm Jessica Tanner. I'm a musical theater performer and mom. Is it really worth it to move to New York City to become a musical theater performer? I know it's always been New York City or bust, but let's bust that rumor because I think that there are other valuable places to live. And I'm saying that as a person who lived in New York City, but let's talk about some other options. The lipstick stain on that already. I know what you might be thinking, that I'm just going to talk about moving to a red state because it's cheaper. And I don't think it's that simple. I think people who live in red states still deserve to have awesome art. And there are people who live in red states that don't have the privilege to be able to afford to live in an expensive city or be able to move away from their families. So we should still be a part of those communities and creating great art and helping people in these places feel safe. If one of these cities resonates with you, I just want to encourage you to have another option and not feel like you have to live in New York City to do musical theater, because there are lots of cities in the United States that have awesome art and musical theater programs that you can thrive at. It's pretty obvious why we think it's New York City or bust, right? We have Broadway, you have off-Broadway. All of the actors move there. Everyone lives there, and you audition to go everywhere else in the world because that's easier. It saves theaters money to just travel to one place and find all the actors there. But equity often requires a lot of these theaters to still do local auditions. And it's cheaper for theaters now to not have to pay for housing or pay for transportation and travel for New York actors. Sometimes it's cheaper to have a local hire. The nice thing about living in New York City is it feels like every time you turn around, you're talking to another actor. So there's lots of opportunities to network and connect with lots of people. You also have access to tons of classes and resources with casting directors and teachers. Some of the top acting studios or voice studios are all in New York. And all of this sounds great until it comes down to the price tag. And I feel like that's an obvious one. Everyone talks about how expensive New York is when it comes to groceries, transportation, just rent in general. But things to think about as we live in a post-COVID world. We already knew about self-tapes before the pandemic, and now it's a staple. Everyone's doing self-tapes. Not only are auditions virtual, EPAs are now virtual. You can submit open call self-tapes, but so are some of these classes and vocal studios. A lot of these teachers are now teaching lessons virtually because we're all working from home now, because it's cheaper, it's easier, it's become our way of life. When we're talking about where you move as actors, it needs to be a more complex conversation and decision than just, I'm gonna be an actor, I have to move to New York or LA. And I think we've added a few cities in the mix, but maybe I'll name a few that you won't expect. So according to apartments.com, the average one-bedroom apartment in Manhattan is over $4,000 a month. Okay, so let's talk about the next city. Let's talk about Chicago. I feel like Chicago is kind of an easy next one, but Chicago is significantly more affordable to live in. Average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Chicago is under $2,000. We're talking over $4,000 average one-bedroom in Manhattan. Under $2,000 average apartment in Chicago. That's significant. That's a ton of buying power. The reality is, even when you're in New York, the stuff that you'll be booking early in your career is likely not to be a Broadway show. And Broadway shows come and go so quickly that even with a high paycheck from a Broadway show, your show can close at any time. So Chicago has big regional theaters like the Steppenwolf and the Goodman Theater and Chicago Shakespeare Theater. Those are three big regional houses. There are also tons of storefront theaters that'll pay a little less. But even thinking about equity, small professional theater contracts, the wages for those aren't enough for you to even pay for your part of your rent in a New York apartment. But they could actually be helpful for a Chicago apartment. New York versus any other city, right? In New York, you're auditioning all the time, not just for Broadway shows or off-Broadway shows that are local. You're also auditioning for things across the country, but you're still required to pay for your rent if you have a lease on an apartment there. So if you're living in, say, Chicago, and you are auditioning less, oh boo, you're less of an actor for auditioning less. Wrong. You're auditioning for things that are only local, that you would be able to commute to. You would be able to say, I am a local hire, all while paying half the rent that you would in New York City. Your buying power and the amount of money that you would get from wages on a contract from them would go way further than in New York City. I feel like Chicago is an easy one. I feel like that's another one that's often in the mix, either New York, LA, or Chicago. But here's a few more you maybe haven't thought about. Washington, DC. This one feels kind of obvious because there's a lot of Broadway tryouts that go through DC, things at the Signature Theater, Arena Theater, or the Kennedy Center. A lot of those shows are cast out of New York City, and living in Washington, DC, then you are a train ride away from New York. You could still go in for EPAs and things like that if that's something that interests you. If you're really dead set on, I want to live in New York City and audition in New York City, living in a city like DC or Philadelphia where you are a train ride away, but there's also still good local theater that you can focus on and be able to afford life is a good option for you if you're early in your career. Average 1-bedroom apartment rent in DC is $2,300 a month compared to $4,000 a month in New York City. And that's just rent. We're not talking about grocery prices and things like that. But having an extra $2,000 a month of wiggle room and still being able to commute, I think DC is an excellent option for actors who really are stuck on that New Yorker bust, but just can't fathom spending that much just to live somewhere. Then if you're someone who's interested in film, LA seems like the obvious option, and rent in LA is now suddenly cheaper than it is in New York City, and I feel like that's not the way it was in the past. There's a lot of smaller venues, a lot more fringe theater going on there. I think you also have to think about what kind of theater you want to do. Are you really obsessed with new musicals? Are you wanting to do stuff pre-Broadway tryouts? Are you wanting to do classics? Because if your goal is to be on Broadway, not everything on Broadway is a revival. But most of the time at these regional theaters and across the country, they're doing shows that have already been on Broadway before. So if you're not interested in new works, then New York or LA may not be the place for you. Or even DC, where they're doing Broadway tryouts. If you want to do more golden age things, I think you can find a city across the United States that's cheaper and more affordable to live in, and that has a season lineup that's more geared towards things that you're more interested in. Before I talk about Houston, I'll talk about Atlanta. Okay, average 1-bedroom rent in Atlanta is a little over $1,600 a month. Even cheaper, right? You're in the South. They also have tons of film benefits there too. So if you're interested in LA, but even that feels a little expensive for you, or let me say this too, not even just too expensive for you, but too expensive in the sense of that is so far away from my family. California can be far away, or Atlanta's on the other side of the country. If you're interested in doing film and you want a city that funds that and cares about film, but thinking about if I want to be available for my family, or my parents are aging, or I really like my family to be involved in things, or if you want to get as far away as possible from your family, I think that's something you can consider as well. Okay. Now, when it comes to Texas is hard to talk about, right? Texas is huge, and I think people that don't live there don't really understand how big it is. A lot of times when you hear people talking about doing arts or doing theater in Texas, they talk about Houston, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, all of the big cities, because 4 or 5 of the biggest cities in the United States are all in the state of Texas, which is crazy. Downtown Houston and downtown Dallas are still a 4-hour drive apart. That's not super convenient. And Texas doesn't have a train system the way that the Northeast does. So in the way that you can live in New York City or live in surrounding cities and just take a train, you can't just work in Houston and take a train to Dallas. You have to have a car. You have to have a car payment. So that does add to your cost of living if you're wanting to live in a city in Texas. I love Houston. We have Theater Under the Stars at the Hobby Center and the Alley Theater as 2 big regional hubs. In downtown Houston, they've also invested in this venue called Match Midtown Arts Theater Center Houston, and lots of theater companies rent out spaces there. So there's a hub there. The Hobby Center also has 2 stages. The Alley has 2 stages. There's tons of great theater happening in Houston and a significantly lower cost of living than New York City. Average rent for a 1-bedroom in Houston is under $1,200 a month. If we were to move to New York, we could still come back when we need to stay somewhere with our family or feel the freedom that we could still come back and do theater in Houston. And that's an exciting and secure thing. I don't think we talk enough about how do you feel secure in this industry, and I think that's one of the ways, is finding a city that is creating the art that is inspiring to you and that you can afford to live in, and not just afford it money-wise, but affording it by being near family that can help you. For me, I want to be a mom, so it's important to me that my daughter, especially while she's young, can be near her grandparents. So then if you wanted to live in Dallas, you've got Dallas Theater Center, huge Tony Award-winning theater, and Dallas is right next to Fort Worth. Those are actually twin cities, sister cities, not Houston. There's an airport in Houston and in Dallas. You can fly easily to other contracts if you were to audition out, because let's be real, even if you're auditioning as much as you were in New York City, you can do it via self-tape in an apartment that costs $1,100 a month or $4,000 a month. The choice is yours, I guess. And then last, you of course have to talk about Minneapolis, St. Paul, Twin Cities, when we're talking about the Guthrie, big regional theater. Lots of theater going on there. There's huge community engagement, lots of great classes and studios there. There's just a lot of great programming and early career opportunities that I think people are missing out on by not giving super cold winters a chance. Obviously, I didn't do that. I'm living in Houston again. And I think all in all, don't put so much pressure on where you live as an actor. There's so much fear around if I don't live in New York that I'm not really doing it. But now in this post-COVID world, we're doing self-tapes. So much is virtual now. So much is meeting people online. If you're present online, if you have a good portfolio of you performing in things showcased online where people can see them on top of sending good tapes and networking with the people that you know, the most important thing for longevity in this career is to have financial security and to be able to build that while feeling satisfied in your artistic endeavors. You've got to find a place that makes sense for you. So if you were a person who was always New York or bust and this made you think about some other options, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. There's no one size fits all in this career. You get to write the blueprint, baby. It's up to you. Thank you for having coffee, tea, whatever you wanted to drink with me. And let's do it again sometime. And if you like content like this, like, subscribe, leave a comment, tell me what you loved, and follow me on social media. I have it all in the description box. Thanks again.